I never thought I'd be the kind of woman with a secret this big, the kind of secret that could blow up a marriage in a single breath. I slept with my husband's best friend, and the night I came home ready to confess, I found my husband tangled up with another woman in our bed. What came next nearly destroyed me, until fate handed me the one twist I never saw coming. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how betrayal burned my old life down, only to give me something worth saving. Stick around, because you won't believe how it ends. But before I spill every juicy detail, hit that subscribe button. You do not want to miss the next scandal in Flame Fate Chronicles. My name is Elena Morgan, and if you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably say I had it all. A steady job at a local interior design firm, a modest but beautiful home in a quiet suburb just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and a husband, Aaron, who, to anyone else, seemed like the picture of stability. But if you lived inside my skin, if you sat with me at night in the silence of our house, you'd know the truth. Perfection can be a mask, and ours had started cracking a long time ago. Aaron and I met when we were 22. College sweethearts who bonded over late-night coffee and the reckless idea that love alone could conquer everything. For a while it felt true. He was ambitious, working in real estate, always chasing the next big sale. I was the dreamer, the planner, the one who tried to ground us when his head went too far into the clouds. We balanced each other, or at least I thought we did. But the years had a way of dulling the sparkle. Conversations turned into one-word exchanges. Date nights became rare. He was always working late, glued to his phone even at dinner. And me? I kept pretending it was just a phase, that if I held on long enough, the man I fell in love with would come back to me. And then there was Derek, Aaron's best friend. Derek had been in the picture almost as long as Aaron had. Tall, with a mischievous grin, and a way of making everyone in a room feel seen. Where Aaron grew quieter over the years, Derek stayed warm and attentive. He'd ask me about my work, really listen when I answered. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me with an expression that made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to admit. Of course, I pushed those thoughts away. Derek was Aaron's best friend. Thinking about him that way was betrayal, even if it only lived inside my head. Still, the contrast was impossible to ignore. One Friday evening, as I set the table for dinner, Aaron walked in, loosened his tie, and barely looked at me. "Don't wait up," he said, dropping his briefcase by the couch. "I've got a client dinner." "Again?" I asked, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. He didn't answer, just disappeared into the bedroom to change. I stood there, staring at the plates I'd set, wondering when I became background noise in my own marriage. It was in moments like these that Derek's memory crept in. The way he always offered to carry the heavy boxes when we moved. How he'd once driven across town to fix our broken sink, when Aaron was too busy to notice the water flooding under the cabinet. Derek noticed. Derek cared. And that made me hate myself a little more. I tried to drown the guilt by burying myself in work. Designing spaces gave me control. A room could be transformed with a few changes. Fresh paint, new textures, better lighting. If only marriage worked the same way. When my firm announced a weekend conference out of town, I jumped at the chance. It wasn't just about the career opportunity. It was about escape. Maybe if I stepped out of the bubble of my suffocating routine, I'd come back with clarity. Or at least with the courage to finally confront Aaron about what we'd become. As I packed my bag, I told myself this trip was just work. Nothing more. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered something else. Sometimes, when you step out of your life, you stumble into a choice that changes everything. At the time, I couldn't imagine how true that would become. The hotel bar was buzzing that night, filled with the kind of energy only out-of-town conferences seemed to carry. Laughter rolled across the room, the clinking of glasses echoing under the dim amber lights. I wasn't planning to stay long, just long enough to be polite, to grab a drink before heading back upstairs to review the next day's presentations. That's when I saw him. Derek. He was leaning against the bar, dressed casually in a navy button-down, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. For a second, I thought I'd imagined him. My husband's best friend. Here, 200 miles from home. Elena? His voice cut through the noise, warm and surprised. Derek. I laughed nervously, walking toward him. What are you doing here? Same as you, I guess. My firm sent me for client meetings. Small world, huh? His smile was easy, effortless, the kind that made you forget for a moment how complicated life really was. We found ourselves at a small corner table, 2 drinks between us, and conversation that flowed like water. He asked about my projects, and I told him about a recent home redesign I was proud of. He actually listened, nodding, asking follow-up questions, making me feel like my words mattered. Aaron hadn't asked about my work in months. The more Derek leaned in, the more I noticed details I shouldn't. The faint scruff along his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the scent of cedar on his cologne. And with every passing minute, the weight of my loneliness pressed harder against my chest. You seem different tonight, he said softly, after our second round of drinks. Different how? Lighter. Freer. Like you've been holding your breath for a long time and finally let it out. The words hit me harder than they should have. Maybe because they were true. I looked down at my glass, swirling the amber liquid. Marriage isn't always what people think it is, I admitted quietly. Derek didn't push. He just nodded, as if he already knew. Maybe he did. He'd seen the cracks, the silences, the way Aaron and I avoided each other at gatherings. When the conversation fell quiet, the space between us hummed with something unspoken. My pulse quickened. This was wrong. So wrong. But when his hand brushed against mine on the table, I didn't move away. Elena. His voice was low, hesitant. I should have stopped it. I should have pulled back and reminded him, and myself, that this was dangerous. But instead, I whispered, "Please, don't." And then he kissed me. It wasn't tentative, wasn't a test. It was fire. Hungry, desperate, the kind of kiss that reminded me what it felt like to be wanted. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out every alarm bell in my head. We stumbled back to my hotel room like 2 people starved of affection. Every step forward was a step deeper into betrayal. But I couldn't make myself stop. I didn't want to stop. That night blurred into fragments. Soft sheets, whispered names, the sound of my own laughter after years of silence. For the first time in forever, I felt alive. And then morning came. I woke tangled in sheets, my body betraying me with the warmth of his touch beside me. Panic hit like a tidal wave. What had I done? I slipped out of bed, gathering my clothes in trembling hands. Derek stirred, his voice hoarse. Elena. Wait. I froze, clutching my dress to my chest. We don't have to regret this, he said quietly. I know what this means. I know it's complicated. But don't pretend it didn't matter. His eyes were steady, filled with something that terrified me more than the act itself. Sincerity. I couldn't answer. My throat burned. My chest ached with guilt. Without another word, I fled the room. Back in the silence of my own, I pressed my face into the pillow and sobbed. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I had betrayed my husband, even though he'd been betraying me long before I found the courage to admit it to myself. But I didn't know that yet. Not until I came home. I drove back home earlier than planned, my stomach in knots the entire ride. Every mile that brought me closer to Raleigh only made the guilt heavier. I had rehearsed a dozen ways to tell Aaron the truth. Maybe I'd start with an apology. Maybe I'd confess everything at once, rip the bandage clean off. Every version ended the same. His face twisting in disgust, his voice shattering the last pieces of our marriage. Still, I couldn't live with the lie. The late afternoon sun painted our neighborhood in warm gold as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same, but something inside me was different. I grabbed my suitcase and forced my legs to move. When I stepped through the front door, silence greeted me. Usually, Aaron would be in the living room, half watching ESPN, half scrolling through his phone. But not today. Aaron. My voice wavered. No answer. I set my bag down, noticing his jacket tossed over the banister. That meant he was home. I followed the faint hum of music drifting from upstairs. My heart beat faster with every step, the dread twisting into something I couldn't name. I pushed open the bedroom door, and my world collapsed. There he was, my husband, in our bed, with another woman. Her hair spilled across my pillow, her laugh sharp and careless. Aaron barely even flinched when the door swung open. He glanced at me like I was an inconvenience, not his wife who had just walked in on the ultimate betrayal. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My suitcase slipped from my hand, the sound echoing in the room. "Are you kidding me?" Aaron sat up, sheet barely covering him, and had the audacity to roll his eyes. "Elena, don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" My voice cracked. "You're in our bed, with someone else, and I'm dramatic?" The woman smirked, completely unbothered. She pulled the sheet around herself and whispered something in Aaron's ear, like I wasn't even standing there. Rage surged through me, burning away the guilt I had carried all weekend. I wanted to scream about Derek, to spit the truth in his face, that I wasn't the only one who'd broken vows. But I couldn't. Not yet. Aaron finally stood, running a hand through his hair as if I had interrupted something minor, like a TV show. "Look, Elena, you and I both know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time. Don't act surprised." The calmness in his tone cut deeper than if he had yelled. My lips trembled. "So this is your solution? To humiliate me? To bring her here? Into our bed?" He shrugged. "At least I'm being honest about what I want. Can you say the same?" I flinched. His words weren't just an insult. They were a mirror, flashing back the sin I carried from that hotel room. For a second, I almost believed I deserved this. But then I saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't feel guilty. He didn't care. And that's when I realized something that stunned me more than walking in on him with her. I had been preparing to confess, to destroy myself with guilt, when all along he had already destroyed us. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I grabbed my suitcase from the floor, lifted my chin, and walked out. My legs felt like stone, but I didn't stop until I was in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I stayed at a hotel across town. Alone, staring at the ceiling, the irony sank in. I had been ready to confess, to give him every ounce of truth, while he had been too busy with someone else to even notice I was gone. For the first time, I let myself feel something besides shame. Anger. Not just at him, but at myself for tolerating the slow unraveling of our marriage for so long. And beneath the anger, a terrifying question I couldn't silence. What if the life inside me isn't even his? 2 weeks passed in a haze. I hadn't gone back home. Instead, I rotated between a cheap motel and crashing on my sister Maya's couch, making excuses about needing space. She didn't press. She could see in my face that something was unraveling, though she had no idea just how deep it went. Every morning I woke with a pit in my stomach, heavier than the guilt that had followed me since that night with Derek. It wasn't just shame anymore. It was nausea. At first, I chalked it up to stress. My appetite had been off, my nerves constantly buzzing. But when I found myself clutching the bathroom sink, gagging at the faint smell of coffee brewing in Maya's kitchen, a memory clawed at me, one I couldn't ignore. The night with Derek. I counted the days in my head. My cycle was late. Too late. "No," I whispered, panic swelling. "No, it can't be." But denial only carried me so far. The next morning, I drove to a pharmacy across town, keeping my sunglasses low as if shame itself might crawl through the car window and expose me. I grabbed the test, paid in silence, and shoved the small paper bag deep into my purse. Back at Maya's, I locked myself in the bathroom. My hands shook as I read the directions, though I already knew how it worked. Minutes later, I sat on the cold tile floor, staring at the small plastic stick. 2 pink lines, clear as day. Pregnant. My chest caved. Tears welled and spilled before I could stop them. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing too loud. The world tilted. My life, the mess I had already made, had just grown even more complicated. But the worst part wasn't the pregnancy itself. It was the question clawing at my insides. Who's the father? Aaron and I hadn't been close for weeks before my trip. Our bedroom had been an empty stage, our intimacy long gone. The timeline wasn't blurry. I knew the truth. The baby was Derek's. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of Maya's guest room. Every possible scenario played in my mind. Should I tell Aaron? The thought of his reaction, his rage, his cruelty, made my blood run cold. He'd call me every name in the book, twist the knife deeper by comparing me to his mistress. He'd weaponize the truth until I had nothing left. Should I tell Derek? The idea made my stomach twist in a different way. Derek didn't deserve to be pulled into this disaster, not when he hadn't asked for any of it. And yet, he was the one person who had shown me genuine kindness in years. Would he even want to know? Or would he look at me with regret in his eyes, wishing that night had never happened? I couldn't answer any of it. When I finally broke down and scheduled a doctor's appointment, the sterile hum of the clinic only made me feel smaller. The doctor confirmed it quickly. 6 weeks along. And just like that, my secret grew weightier, more real. On the drive back, I pulled into a quiet park and sat there, gripping the steering wheel. Families strolled past with strollers. Kids laughed from the swings. My hand instinctively drifted to my stomach. Inside me was proof of everything I had tried to bury. Proof of one night I could never undo. By the time I returned to Maya's, I had made one small decision. I wouldn't tell Aaron. Not now. Maybe not ever. He had forfeited the right to my truth the second I found him with another woman in our bed. But Derek? That question lingered. And fate, cruel as it was, wasn't about to let me ignore it for long. Because a week later, Derek showed up at Maya's door. "Elena," he said, his voice steady, but his eyes searching. "We need to talk." When I opened the door and saw Derek standing there, my stomach dropped. Maya had just left for work, so it was only me in the house. I froze in the doorway, clutching the edge like it could keep me steady. "Derek," I breathed. His expression was unreadable. Not anger, not pity, just a kind of quiet intensity that made my chest tighten. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, but finally nodded. He stepped inside, and suddenly the walls felt too close, the air too heavy. We sat across from each other in the living room, silence stretching until it snapped. "Elena," he said, voice low, "I know something's wrong. You've been avoiding me since that night. And I can't pretend it didn't mean something. Did it mean something to you?" My throat closed. I wanted to lie, to tell him it was a mistake, but the truth pressed hard against my ribcage. It did. It meant everything, and that's the problem. His brow furrowed. Then what are you running from? I swallowed hard, the words bitter in my mouth. I'm pregnant, Derek. His eyes widened, and for a second, he didn't breathe. Pregnant? I nodded, tears burning. And it's yours. The silence that followed was suffocating. My heart pounded, waiting for him to recoil, to curse me, to tell me I had ruined his life. But Derek didn't do any of that. He leaned forward, voice steady, but shaking at the edges. Are you sure? Yes. My voice cracked. Aaron and we hadn't been together in weeks before the trip. The timing, it's you. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, processing. Then he looked at me with something I didn't expect. Resolve. Elena, I won't abandon you. Or the baby that broke me. Sobs ripped from my chest, years of loneliness spilling out. Derek crossed the room, pulling me into his arms, and for the first time in so long, I felt safe. But the moment didn't last. Because later that week, Aaron came storming into Maya's house, fury written all over his face. He must have heard from someone. I didn't ask how. He barged into the living room, his voice already raised. So this is where you've been hiding? He spat. Living off your sister's pity while you play the victim? Pathetic. I stood, hands trembling, but fists clenched. I left because you humiliated me, because you didn't care enough to even hide what you were doing. He sneered. And what? You think you're some saint? You're nothing without me, Elena. Nothing. That's when Derek stepped in from the hallway, his presence like a wall between us. Careful, Aaron. Aaron's eyes narrowed, recognition flickering. You've got to be kidding me. My best friend? You two? His laughter was sharp, bitter. Unbelievable. You couldn't wait to crawl into her bed, could you? Derek didn't flinch. At least I didn't betray her trust for months, maybe years. Don't stand here and pretend you're the victim. Aaron's face twisted with rage, but I had had enough. My voice cut through, steady and cold. I'm pregnant, Aaron. That silenced the room. For a moment he just stared at me, blinking. Then his face hardened. It's not mine, is it? The silence was answer enough. His hands balled into fists. You disgusting. Don't you dare, I snapped, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Don't you dare try to shame me when you've been crawling into other women's beds for God knows how long. I gave you everything, Aaron, and you threw it away. He looked at me like I was a stranger, his pride cracking into something uglier. You'll regret this. Both of you. And then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The silence that followed was deafening. My knees weakened, but Derek caught me before I fell. Elena, he whispered, his hand steady on my back. He doesn't get the last word. Not this time. For the first time in years, I believed it. The days after Aaron stormed out felt strangely quiet. For years I had lived with the constant background noise of his criticism, his cold silences, his phone buzzing with work calls at all hours. Now, for the first time, there was peace. Not easy peace. My life was far from sordid, but the kind that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone else's approval. I stayed at Maya's for a while longer, and Derek checked in every day. Sometimes he'd bring groceries. Sometimes he'd just sit with me on the porch. No expectations, no pressure. Just presence. One afternoon, as I rubbed my hand absent-mindedly over my stomach, Derek sat beside me, watching quietly. Finally, he spoke. I know this isn't what you planned, he said softly, but I want to be here. For you. For the baby. If you'll let me. I turned to him, tears stinging my eyes. Why? You don't owe me anything. That night, it was a mistake. His jaw tightened. Don't call it that. It wasn't a mistake, Elena. Maybe it wasn't planned. Maybe it wasn't clean or easy. But it wasn't nothing. You mattered then, and you matter now. Something in my chest cracked open. For so long, I'd been made to feel small, like my feelings were inconveniences. But Derek's words, they stitched pieces of me back together. It wasn't about running into his arms to fix me. It was about finally realizing I deserved more than being an afterthought in my own marriage. Aaron, meanwhile, didn't fade quietly. I heard through mutual friends that he tried to spin the story his way, claiming I'd destroyed our marriage, painting himself as the victim. But the truth has a way of sticking, and people remembered his late nights, his wandering eyes, the woman he didn't even bother to hide in our bed. I stopped caring about his narrative. For the first time in years, I stopped centering my life around him. Months later, I stood in my sister's kitchen, one hand on my growing belly, laughing at something Derek had just said. Maya caught my eye, her smile warm but curious. "You look different," she said. "How so?" I asked. "Lighter, happier. Like you finally let go of something heavy." And she was right. I had let go. Of the guilt, of the shame, of Aaron's shadow that had followed me for so long. The baby inside me wasn't a reminder of betrayal. It was a symbol of a new start. One born from mistakes, yes, but also from truth. When Derek reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. For once, I wasn't afraid of the future. It's been almost a year since that night when my whole world cracked open. Sometimes, I still catch myself looking back, wondering how I ever lived so long inside the walls of Aaron's indifference. How I convinced myself that scraps of affection were enough to keep me fed. But now, when I look down at the tiny hand wrapped around my finger, I know those days are gone. My daughter, our daughter, is everything I never knew I needed. The moment I held her, the chaos of the past year faded into something simpler, clearer. She was proof that something good, something pure, could grow out of the mess. Aaron never came back. He didn't fight for custody, didn't even show up to the hospital. The last I heard, his mistress left him when she realized his promises were as empty as his loyalty. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but mostly I felt nothing. He was simply gone from my story. Derek stayed, not in a sweeping fairy tale way, but in the quiet, steady way that mattered. Midnight feedings, doctor's appointments, long walks through the park when the walls of postpartum exhaustion closed in on me. He was there, not because he had to be, but because he chose to be. And little by little, I let myself choose him back. I don't pretend everything is perfect now. Life never works that way. But I've learned something important. Perfection isn't the goal. Peace is. And peace is what I have finally, after years of silence and shadows. If you asked me a year ago what I wanted, I would have said, to fix my marriage, to make Aaron love me again. Ask me today, and my answer is simple. I want to keep building this new life, to raise my daughter in a home where love isn't rationed out in crumbs, but given freely, to let her grow up watching a mother who chose herself, even when it was hard. Maybe that's what fate really is. Not some grand design written in the stars, but the small choices we make when life falls apart. The choice to walk away, the choice to open a new door, the choice to believe we deserve more. And I did. I still do. Have you ever discovered a new beginning after betrayal burned your old life down? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if my journey hit home, like this video and subscribe for more Flame and Fate Chronicles. Remember, strength often shows up in the ruins,